Now, my wife is constantly telling me that I need to test and measure things. So I'm going to take her words and make that the next part of this presentation. That says, look, we've done this design competition, and these people have turned in these proposals. We're down to two great proposals now. Either one probably is, would work. But let's see, what can we do with that proposal? I am a veteran of Crew 8 at the Mars Desert Research Station near Hanksville, Utah, more than 20 years ago now. What is behind me in this image is a simulated Mars base. It can hold 6 astronauts at a time. Earth and Mars line up once every 26 months. And in the simulated Mars base, what they've done is they've taken an entire 26-month mission to Mars, and really, that's not even counting coming back, right? So 26 times 2. And they've compressed it down to 2 weeks of time at the simulated Mars base out in an environment that is reminiscent, analogous to what it would look like on Mars. And I was a member of Crew 8, one of the early ones. I can tell you pretty confidently that the little culture that we set up there in those 2 weeks did not carry over to the next crew. And now they have gone, more than 200 crews have gone through this simulated Mars base by now, like 260s or higher. What we need is a way to test and measure this Martian civilization that's been proposed, but a little tiny 6-person Mars base for 2 weeks is not adequate. All right, well, over my teaching career, I pondered, how small of a society does it take to have a stable culture? How many people were on the Mayflower when it created the Yankee Dome and so forth? Well, based on my teaching experience, being in high schools with 4 or 6 grade levels and 50 to 100 teachers, and how different grade levels, freshmen or incoming classes affect the total or not, here's what I've estimated. A group of people that's over 50 is large enough to have a culture. And I'm just making it an odd number so that we don't have exactly stalemate all the time. And again, based on teaching, no more than 20% of the newcomers dilute the culture of the population when they arrive. And that on Mars, a cycle of 26 months is enough to assimilate the new 20% arrivals. Now, the original simulated Mars base had 1 spaceship with 6 people on board. And that's a really slow way to build up a population of 51 people. So I propose using 2 spaceships, but not all 12 people at a time, get off or stay at that base or settlement, but let's say 9, or for 2 cycles, 8 people at a time get off and join the colony. The others might be involved with maintaining ballistic cyclers between the 2 planets, or doing astronaut type stuff instead of settlement type stuff on Mars. So here's a graph. Each number on the x-axis is a cycle. 26 months is each cycle on the bottom. The green line represents how many settlers land on Mars that cycle. So it starts off with 9, then 8, then 8, and then 9 after that. The blue line represents how many of those people who are on Mars come to Earth. And for the first 3 cycles, no one does. They're there to settle on Mars. Now, beginning in cycle 4, now people who've been on Mars for the past 3 cycles can start coming back. Or maybe even people from, cycle 3, not even cycle 1. So maybe based on needs, personal choice, you can stay on Mars indefinitely if you're a settler, or you might only stay on Mars for 1 cycle, depending on, again, personal circumstance. So eventually that grows to a steady state where by cycle 9, for every 9 settlers who are arriving, we have 9 people departing the settlement heading back to Earth. And the red line shows, sure, in 8 cycles, we can have more than 50 settlers on Mars. And that means a stable Martian culture can be established in just 18 Earth years. And that settlement by Zelensky is going to determine the culture and social behavior of a Martian civilization for centuries to come, unless they're, wiped out by invaders. All right, so what I propose is that the Mars Society expand the Mars Desert Research Station. Instead of just one HAB module for 6 crew members, expand it to 9 or 10. And the drawings at the bottom are from a space architecture book, an excellent one, where they did some preliminary analysis about different configurations based on how many not viewports, but airlocks the site has. What do you do if you have to evacuate, one direction or another? So there's preliminary designs. None of them was ideal in all categories. That's why it's going to take some effort to decide what configuration to try out and then actually set it up. So here's, let's go back to that graph. So I've changed the wording. This is different from 2 weeks ago. So instead of going back one slide, I went forward and said, look, if every cycle at the simulated Mars base is 2 weeks, and it only takes 8 cycles to establish a Martian civilization, then in principle, it only takes 16 weeks to establish, to germinate an embryonic simulated Martian culture at an expanded Mars Desert Research Station. Wow. And a field season at the MDRS typically goes on for 20 weeks. That's twice the width of this graph. That gives us plenty of time to, test and measure and see, well, is this little simulated Martian culture stable? Are the assumptions that went into it working? What features need to be emphasized? Where's the critiquing and revision that goes on? Okay, now in my original talk, I skipped a slide because I was out of time, and now I'm way over my 30 minutes allowed time at the convention 2 weeks ago. But the question was, are there any cultural issues with establishing an expanded simulated Mars settlement in the far west, which is where Hanksville, Utah is located? And now I'm going to take the time to point out on this slide, I was going to remind people that the far west in the United States required heavy industry for it to become settled. That you needed railroads and strip mining and smelters and all this, major infrastructure project. Well, they were controlled by corporations in Chicago and Seattle and New York. And the people who lived in the far west, they were pretty resentful because the profits, the decision-making went to the corporations out there. And so they viewed themselves as being like an internal colony of the other subnations of the United States, just being exploited, resources and wealth being extracted, and they were like almost like the slaves having to work the area. Today, the far west tends to be angry with the federal government, partly for allowing the corporations to, do what they did. But, here's, talk about insult to injury. Consider this. Out of all the different 11 subnations, the far west is the only subnation that the United States government has repeatedly, literally nuked. I mean, that's where we did our atomic bomb testing. And even today, it's the go-to subnation for storing our radioactive waste. So the far west has Trust issues, maybe. And if the Mars Society is trying to create a simulated Mars settlement in the far west, then culturally we need to respect and address far west concerns. And there's two things I can point out. First, again, from Robert Zubrin, the current Mars Society project is to create a Mars Technology Institute. And the principle behind it is, as inventions and technology progress, standard of living improves for everyone, including, the residents of the far west. And the second point I want to make came from my wife that says, okay, positive feature about people in the far west, they want to work and they love to work hard. So if the Mars Society highlights and emphasizes, we understand, we respect those cultural values, we embrace those cultural values. We're not going to set up a settlement and have some spoiled inventors, sipping their cappuccinos. We're going to have a vibrant, hardworking Martian settlement, drawing the outlines of a new civilization on Mars. So overcoming the concerns of the far west, addressing the concerns, maybe even earning the support, socially, culturally, of residents of the far west for what the Mars Society is trying to do. So that's what this slide was about. Being, aerospace engineer, we have this process that says, okay, we've gone through all this. I've identified the problem, exploring what to do about it, right? We're polarized. We could do a design competition. We could design and create and try it out, expand the MDRS. But now, the best part, we could make it better. And how do we go about doing that? Well, it's an iterate and revise process. So being a recently retired high school teacher, I still have in my heart kind of a wish that the very first time we do this international design competition, it be composed of high school teams. That probably isn't what you had in mind. But for me, I've seen just how high quality work could be generated by a motivated group of high school people. And here in the United States, high school means up to age 18. Okay, so high school is like 6 years, maybe at most, up to age 18. So 12 to 18-year-olds. Mostly 14 to 18-year-olds. Then the next iteration, sure. Now, still some high school students, can they work with junior high college students, first 2 years of college? And then after that, sorry, this slide is different from what I presented 2 weeks ago at the Mars Society. This is based on some suggestions and feedback I got over these past 10 days or so. So blending, but skewing towards more and more education experience and life experience. And basically, an iteration is a season. So, a field season is 20 cycles, that's 40 weeks. Design competition is typically 4 to 5 weeks. So once a year, we go through this. It would be sad if we gain Mars, but we lose the United States. I began this presentation by claiming that the United States is disintegrating. It's breaking apart into a balkanized federation of 11 major different sub-nations that are in so much conflict with each other right now. It is politically impossible for the Mars Society to have the consensus that we need to actually go and settle Mars. What you're looking at is a report card on the United States put together by a group called Social Progress Index. It's color-coded, where blue means we're doing above average, yay. Yellow means average, and red means below average. And so just glancing at this chart, you can see there's only one thing that the United States is good at, and that is our quality-weighted universities. So That's why foreigners come here to study. They come to MIT and Cornell and Yale. And what do after they get their degree? Look at the report card. They leave. They go back to their home countries. We could improve. And I'm citing this as further evidence that the United States really is not pulling together like we could. All right, so this brings us to my last presentation slide. The real depolarizing social impact out of all this that can come out of my presentation that the Mars Society can do can come out of the Mars Society ambassadors. This already exists. We already have Mars Society ambassadors. What I'm proposing is that we do this international design competition. We expand the Mars Desert Research Station, or maybe site it someplace, somewhere else. Maybe it makes sense to have it near a major population center so that there's a financial lure of tourism for people coming to look at the Mars Society, settlement. Or maybe it's more appropriate to have it in the outback of Australia. I don't know. I do have in mind how to figure it out, though. But what I'm proposing is that these Mars Society ambassadors, current ones and new ones, maybe get requalified by going through a gracious professionalism experience. Now, if First Tech Challenge is for high school students, but they always have a need for mentors and people to come in, adults to come in and work with them. So all of these adults, if they've never done a robotics competition, they could choose to get involved with a First Tech Challenge field season at their local club, school, and get immersed in gracious professionalism. But after that, the important part is, whether they do that or not, these ambassadors should be cycled through an expanded MDRS field season and directly experience, what happens when we try to take a design proposal for a culture and germinate this simulated embryonic Martian culture in this analog Martian settlement. Okay? And once they're armed with that experience, these ambassadors should go forth and enter into the halls of academia, because that's where critical thinking skills are still being exercised. And when they get there, to act as positive social influencers. So these ambassadors should go and visit Model United Nations clubs and go into AP US history classrooms and civics classrooms and government studies classrooms. And the point that all of us should be repeatedly driving home is this. Look at what we're doing with these simulated Martian cultural ambassadors. Imagine how much even better it would be if the United States were to bring real Martian ambassadors here. These were some of the references that I used in figuring this all out. This slide I forgot to include this slide in my actual presentation at the Mars Society back on October 5th, 2023. What I would like to talk about now for a moment is what's happened in the 10 days or so since I went to that convention. I've gotten some feedback and some suggestions. And one of the more intriguing suggestions goes something like this. Become more ambitious, okay? This presentation I just shared with you was targeted towards members of the Mars Society, specifically within the United States, and then general public that's kind of interested in what are we trying to do. When I discussed this with a couple of Mars Society members, they pointed out, well, the Mars Society in their annual Mission to Mars design competition already has international partners. And yes, they get confused when they try to work with the United States and figure out us because of our great conflict going on here. But they don't want to retreat to only having US participants in their design competitions. They want it to be international and continue to be international. So maybe what we could do is say, yes, Canadians, Australians, our good friends, the Mongolians, be part of the next year's design competition, if it were put into place that quickly. But the focus maybe still is pretty much culture within the United States, getting these 11 different sub-nations to go on the same page, go in the same direction, have a common myth that we all agree to. Yes, we want to build a better version of ourselves. And we can see that right now our government is in need of tweaking. And here are ideas for what a Martian civilization, cultural values, at least, maybe not government, but at least, social and cultural values, what we would like, what we aspire them to be like. The most intriguing suggestion I got from this convention is to go big. And, think of this. The Apollo moon landing required a Saturn V rocket. No one company could build that rocket. Boeing did this part, Rockwell did that part, Douglas or McDonnell Douglas, Northrop Grumman, or all these different companies each had to build different parts of the rocket, and NASA integrated it, and off they went. To actually draw up a civilization on Mars, a settlement on Mars, would take more than just the Mars Society. And maybe even the simulated Mars settlement would take more than just the Mars Society. So my next project, after posting this, is going to go and try to develop in that direction and look at involving different societies. There's several out there and different organizations. Some of them have already been reaching out to me saying, okay, we know you're an educator who's done a lot with students and outreach and involvement. Please give us a project to work on. I've got some ideas. And I am going to work on that myself. This is, all I can say right now is stand by. I will hopefully in the near future post an additional video of the expanded, new and improved 2.0 project by Phil Turek to settle Mars and have Mars serve as a tool to have positive social influence here on Earth, particularly within the United States. All right, so on the high road to Mars.